year of 1997 was very important for the rise of ECW. Their big invasion of / co-promoting with the World Wrestling Federation earlier that year led to the success of their first official pay-per-view, Barely Legal, that April, and ever since then things have been going crazy for ECW. Triple Threat is causing chaos in the company. Rob Van Dam is certainly making his mark as the top star to watch in that company, and as we head toward Hardcore Heaven that summer, it's time to look at a very pivotal show featuring one of the most iconic matches in ECW history. I'm talking about Born to be Wired from August 9th, 1997 at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This show was nominated by John the Wolverine over at patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret. This show, technically not a pay-per-view, it is a home video release. Like I said, this show takes place only 8 days before Hardcore Heaven in Fort Lauderdale, so kind of bucking the requirements of the classic pay-per-view format on this one. But again, considering the legendary nature of the main event, I figured it is worth talking about here, and we'll talk about some of the fallout that led to what happened at Hardcore Heaven in this review as well. Joey Styles on solo commentary for this release. 1,300 people packed the building on the corner of Swanson and Rittner for this one. Opening matchup sees Little Guido with the rest of the FBI, Tracy Smothers and Tommy Rich, taking on ECW newcomer Pablo Marquez. Rich gets a "you fat fuck" chance, and he gets a few shots off from the crowd on the mic in response. Marquez off to a fast start, hits the Hurricane Rana and follows up with a suicide dive. He's intercepted off the springboard back in the ring, but he does come back with a nice missile drop kick. Pablo's dumped on the outside. Tommy Rich cheating in full view of the referee, but again, this sort of thing does not really matter in ECW. Interesting flying kick out of the ring by Pablo. Smothers grabbing Marquez, roughing him up a little bit. Pablo's back in the ring. He dives to the outside onto Rich and Smothers. He goes up top, but Tracy distracts the referee. Rich decks Pablo with the Italian flagpole. Little Guido wins. I give it 1.5 stars out of 5. It's a short and sweet matchup here. It's cruiserweight action given to you in a relatively small dose, but I think that what we see in the ring itself is pretty fluid and smooth. And during my research for this show, something that I learned about Pablo Marquez was he would go on to become Babu, Tiger Ali Singh's assistant in the WWF. Up next, Louis Spicolli, still milking that feud he had with Tommy Dreamer, dressing like him here, taking on the former Triple Crown champion, Mikey Whipwreck. Something I learned from watching this show was that during this time, Mikey came out to the song Pepper by Butthole Surfers, making him one of my favorite wrestlers now. Louis does get a "you fat fuck" chant directed at him, but it takes a lot longer for him to get it than Tommy Rich did in the last match, and Spicolli is way bigger than Tommy. Mikey, with some fast offense against Spicolli after being thrown around for a bit, gives him ring post and applying the pressure. Spicolli hits the stunner on Whipwreck, just stealing everyone's stuff now. Crossbody is caught and Mikey goes for a ride. A powerbomb is countered into a Hurricane Rana. Mikey makes his comeback, but now we get the inverse, a Franken Mikey turned into a powerbomb. Spicolli goes up top, goes for a swanton, but gets none of it. On the outside, Mikey with a big ol' plancha, but he gets more of the barricade than he did Louis. Ouch. Spicolli goes up top again, but Mikey cuts him off, hits a Franken Mikey to win. I give it 2.5 stars out of 5. I like this matchup here. I think that the chemistry between Whipwreck and Spicolli was pretty strong. A good face, heel dynamics in this one, telling a good story, keeping the crowd excited. That plancha spot into the barricade was a little scary though, we'll say. Spicolli not much longer for ECW here. He would leave the company on relatively bad terms, largely due to his drug and alcohol use, and would soon find a home in WCW for a bit before his untimely death in 1998. But something in my research that blew my mind was the fact that, it was like his drug abuse that was considered this embarrassment to ECW. When ECW throws a guy out for having too much of a drug problem, then that's pretty severe. Up next, Little Spike Dudley, the runt of the litter, taking on the Triple Threat's Bam Bam Bigelow, who of course has the mobility, Joe-bility, and ho-bility. Spike trying a single leg takedown, but Bam Bam responds with a big ass Beal from corner to corner. Bam Bam picks up Spike like he's nothing, and ever the consummate heel drops him straight down rather than throwing him into the waiting arms of these bloodthirsty fans. The fans hate that. Spike keeps fighting despite being in a losing battle. Bigelow with a vertical suplex with extra post. On the outside, Spike is busted open. Triple B goes for the moonsault but gets none of it. Spike makes this big comeback. After running at him like 8 times, he finally takes Bigelow down, goes for the acid drop, and Bigelow blocks. Joey Styles with a very prophetic call saying, one day Spike Dudley can tell his children he got a 2 count on Bam 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 Bigelow. Bigelow picks him up, puts him down, Spike rebounds with a low headbutt, hops up on top of him and hits a victory roll for the upset win. Bigelow entering Hardcore Heaven with a loss. I give it 3 stars out of 5. This was a great David versus Goliath story done really well, which I think is one of the trademarks, I think, of ECW. It is a match formula that would be done almost ad nauseum during this time period in ECW, and even though this match takes place like right after another match where it's like, oh, the heel takes his opponent too lightly and ends up losing, I think it's done differently enough that it still gets a pass, in my opinion. Joey Styles' call where he says, you know, oh, one day he can tell his children that he got a 2 count on Bam Bam Bigelow. It feels like it's giving away what's going to happen at the end, that Spike will come out and get a win in the end. But, you know, I think that, you know, wrestling is telling a story. The commentary is part of that storytelling process. So I think that you're allowed to kind of telegraph it a little bit, even if the story becomes kind of this predictable way of like, oh, you know, David ends up beating Goliath. To have that commentary there to really kind of drive that point home before the hero's miraculous recovery, I think that's okay. Bam Bam would get his heat back in a major way, though, 1 week later at the pay-per-view when he destroyed Spike in a rematch in about 5 minutes. In a battle of the Chris's, Chetty takes on Candido. Chetty is billed here as the Rookie, which I feel like they called him that for like 2 years or so before he finally developed more of a personality teaming with Nova. I think at this point there, he is the Rookie. He's very much kind of an unsculpted, you know, mold of clay. He would develop into a better character over time, but this early gimmick is just so white meat babyface, so plain Jane for ECW. It's kind of a wonder to me that like he stayed in this kind of mode for as long as he did. Candido, meanwhile, 25 years old here, a member of Triple Threat, and he's feuding with Taz over the TV championship. On TV recently, he stole Taz's singlet and towel, which was a big moment in their feud. The match starts out going Chetty's way with some big arm drags, though one of them looked kind of scary. Chetty! Just as some fans begin a boring chant, which why? We get a big Hurricane Rana that sends both of them out of the ring. Candido's on top of Chetty for a good while. A big "We Want Taz" chant, but a stalling vertical by Candido, who responds with a Taz pose. Beautiful. Top rope sunset flip blocked by Chetty. We get a kick out. Candido spitting right in Chetty's face, which fires him up, but only for a moment. Candido goes off the turnbuckle again, but pays for it. Big fiery face comeback for the Rookie. Chetty goes for a top rope somersault leg drop, but Candido moves. Ouchie bump. Still gets the superplex off though. Big double underhook suplex off the top, and Candido wins this one. 3 stars out of 5 for me on this one. I think this match did a great service for Chris Chetty, making him look really strong and viable of a contender against the more experienced Candido. The crowd even played a part in making this match better because helping tell the story about Candido's feud with Taz. They're chanting Taz at him. He responds and he does some moves and poses to kind of mock Taz more. So just the interplay there, I think, is really well done. The former world champion Shane Douglas makes his way to the ring and has something to say before his matchup here. He says no matter who wins tonight's main event of Terry Funk and Sabu, he actually wants both of them in a 3-way dance next week at the pay-per-view to try and recreate the magic of the night the line was crossed, which incidentally would be the mission statement of Hardcore Homecoming. On we go now to see Shane taking on Lance Storm, coming out to Sad But True by Metallica. Talk about a song that does not fit a wrestler's vibe. Early in the match, I swear there's a Melvin chant directed toward Douglas. Was that something that people chanted at him, like Melvin? I mean, that's a Matt Taven thing today, but is that a Shane Douglas thing in '97? Storm with a lot of arm-based offense. Francine gets up on the apron, almost gets taken out by Storm as he's dropped on the top rope. Very creative sing-song chant by the fans toward Francine. Is it sad that that's the closest wrestling would have to a footy chant for a very long time? Francine throwing some chairs into the ring, Shane with a twisting vertical suplex onto them. Storm in his beaver tail is able to recover and he goes on a big run, hitting Shane with everything. A big "she's got herpes" chant as these guys are doing all sorts of false finishes. We get another missed top rope maneuver, kind of frustrating that so many of these matches tonight have had that exact spot. Lance counters the belly to belly, almost gets the win. Douglas kicks out, gets his suplex off, covers and wins the match. I give it 3.5 stars out of 5. Good solid wrestling here. Storm is pretty exciting to watch as kind of the foil to Shane. I think Douglas getting a nice clean victory days before the pay-per-view is a good choice. Not everyone will get that luxury on this show tonight, but for Shane to win makes a lot of sense. And yeah, just really a really good solid wrestling match. ECW TV Championship on the line as Taz defends against Al Snow early in his time in ECW during this talent exchange. He's dressed in the Leaf Cassidy gimmick, starting to go a little crazy, but he has not started incorporating the mannequin head yet, though he would soon become one of the most popular acts in ECW during the late 90s. And if you want to hear more about that and how they screwed that up, you can check out my review of WrestlePalooza 98, which is right here. Al gets on the mic with a bit of heel work. He says the people booing him here are the same ones who cheered for him when he worked at the Spectrum in the WWF. Some mat grabs by both men. Taz gets Snow locked in a leg bar for a second. Snow tries to leave but has second thoughts. Back in the ring, Taz catching Snow, hitting the Alabama Slam before it had that name. Snow hitting an Enziguri in Taz's face and starts to take over. Taz does manage to hit a T-bone Tazplex to create some separation for a moment. Snow's able to stay on top, even gets a couple of suplexes off on Taz himself, but Taz promptly Tazes up, and after a couple of attempts, locks in the Kata Hajime! Snow taps out, and Taz wins. I give it 2 stars out of 5. The match was okay. I think there might have been a bit of a disconnect because it was going between like brawling and wrestling so often it was kind of hard to tell what the flow was like. The fans certainly didn't give Snow any kind of chance of winning it. I think at times it felt like the fans were just kind of waiting for Taz to eventually do his, get up really quick comeback thing before the finish. Although I will say Snow, his storytelling and his mannerisms and body language showing more of like the insanity beginning to creep in for him, I think that was really good and helpful to his arc, certainly. It was a good warm-up match for Taz, who would ultimately beat Candido in their title match 8 days later. Time for the Dudley Boys and Joel Gertner to make their very, very long entrance here as they take on the newly formed hardcore chair-swinging freaks, Balls Mahoney and Axel Rotten, who I will refer to henceforth as Rotten Balls. The Dudleys are holding the tag belts, but they are not the champions. The Gangstas actually beat them a couple of weeks earlier, but then Bubba and Devon beat them down, putting them in the hospital and took the belts with them. Now, if New Jack and Mustafa cannot compete at Hardcore Heaven, the belts will officially go back to the Dudleys. Axel with a nice Riddle Box shirt, by the way. ICP would make their ECW debut at Hardcore Heaven 1 week later. A lot of tense words exchanged between he and Devon, his former tag team partner. Big Dick getting in the way of Balls. Rotten Balls think about it for a minute. They go up the ramp and through the curtain and come back with the returning Hack Myers, and the match now becomes a 6-man tag. Axel and Devon fight into the crowd, even outside the building for a hot second. We have no idea what's happened to the other 4 guys in this match, by the way, when everyone makes it back into the ring. Balls with a top rope leg drop and a kick out, big headshots traded between the boys, an accidental collision between Devon and Sign Guy Dudley. Balls is chokeslammed through a table on the outside, leaving Hack Myers all by himself. He goes for something off the top, but he's cut off. A 3D, and the Dudleys win. I give it 1.5 stars out of 5. I did like the setup going from the tag team match to the 6-man, the way they told that story. It is a very classic ECW trope, that, but also another classic trope is the big crowd brawl when a match like this takes place. And this match was pretty much just that. As for the tag title situation, the Dudleys would officially regain the belts 1 week later by forfeit as Mustafa Saeed left the company before Hardcore Heaven. Up next, in a match that I believe is one of the first times ever these two faced off in ECW, Rob Van Dam takes on Tommy Dreamer. Dreamer is currently in a big feud with the invading Jerry Lawler, who recently damaged Dreamer's testicles with a kendo stick. Yikes on bikes. RVD, of course, heavily embracing his newfound stardom from WWF exposure, considering himself a really big deal, a whole effing show, if you will, well above the rest of the ECW folk. A lot of talking to start things off. RVD wants to pose, but Dreamer's had enough. Nice back and forth to begin the action here. Dreamer dives to the outside onto his opponent. On the outside, a fan throws a street sign at Dreamer. He actually catches it and uses it. Van Dam with a plancha to the outside. A couple of minutes later on the barricade, we get the Fonzie-assisted kick into the face of the chair. Van Dam with a frog splash, not quite 5 stars yet though. Dreamer kicks out. Dreamer gets out of the way of a split-legged moonsault and starts coming back. Drop kicks a chair into RVD's face, puts him in the trio of woe. Another running drop kick. Dreamer goes up top, hits a frog splash of his own. Alfonso gets in the ring, but Beulah McGillicuddy on the attack here. Dreamer goes to DDT Fonzie, but Van Dam hits his Innator. Dreamer fights back, Sabu interferes, Van Dam capitalizing with the trash can attacks. RVD wins. The beating continues until the Triple Threat come in and attack everyone else for no real reason. Now in come more members of the locker room, and everyone's fighting everyone. The BWO, the Dudleys, the FBI, Bobby Duncombe Jr., ends with the Dudleys standing tall until Rotten Balls run in and beat up the Dudleys. Finally, New Jack comes in alongside the Eliminators, and he does his whole New Jack thing. Bubba and Devon get the crap beat out of them. Then, of course, Joel Gertner gets his comeuppance as well, dinked in the head, a Cronus 450, yay, baby faces. Now, as far as the match itself goes, I'm going to give this one 3 stars out of 5. I think it's a hard-hitting, fast-paced match. I wish this match had actually gone a few more minutes. I think that if you gave it more time and allowed them to have more of a back and forth, I think you could have really told a nice story with this and made it more dramatic. I think that, obviously they will have more matches down the line throughout the years, but this is one, as far as an opening salvo, I think it was pretty solid. But now it's time for that main event match. It's Funk versus Brunk. The world champion Terry Funk defending against Sabu in a barbed wire match. The ropes are taken down and replaced with that devastating barbed wire. Each man having to stop from running into the barbed wire early on, and Sabu is pushed into the barbed wire, the first victim of the wire tonight. He goes into it a few more times. Sabu's puffy pants are shredded. Boo reverses a whip, and now Funk goes into the wire. Pretty grisly stuff as Sabu gigs Funk in the face with a piece of barbed wire. Sabu goes for a corner attack, but Funk gets out of the way. This is the moment where Sabu's left bicep is cut wide open. It's pretty hard to look at. Sabu frantically trying to sell and do shit while also wrapping his arm up heavily with wrist tape. Holy crap, what a sight this is. Sabu picking right back up where he left off though. That is some insane adrenaline coursing through his veins, you gotta believe. Funk goes to the spinning toe hold. Fonzie gets involved and gets dragged over the top of the barbed wire for his efforts. Sabu dropped Tum Tum first onto it, spends more time wrapping his arm up, hanging upside down, while Funk uses the barbed wire on Fonzie's back. Funk now has a pair of wire cutters, grabbing a length of wire, whipping Sabu with it. Oh, his hair's caught it and everything. Sabu stabs Funk in the head with wire cutters now. In comes RVD to join the beatdown. Van Dam rolling up Funk in the barbed wire like a proverbial hardcore burrito. Boo with the leg drop onto Funk through a table. In comes Tommy Dreamer, who fights off Van Dam, carries him off over his shoulders. Funk is still in a tangled mess and is able to kick out though. Sabu wraps himself up in more barbed wire. The Arabian leg drop on Funk through the table. Both men now tangled up together. It looks like a big, painful mess. Every time they move, they get more intertwined. Sabu fighting for a cover, and he gets the win. Sabu wins the ECW World title for the first time since '93 when the company was Eastern Championship Wrestling. These gladiators getting cut out of the wire, the fans showing their appreciation and their horror, quite frankly, as the show comes to a close. I give this one 4 stars out of 5. Now, you might consider that to be a controversial rating. Your opinion of this match might differ very wildly from mine, but I think watching this, especially for the first time from my perspective, this is certainly a match that I think is worthy of its legend and its mythos in ECW. It's a match that really you have to commend both guys for their willingness to sacrifice themselves in a truly barbaric match. It's so brutal that Paul Heyman famously said he would never book a barbed wire match in ECW again for what these guys put themselves through. Sabu had to receive 100 stitches for his battle wounds. For him to be able to cut open his arm the way he did and continue by just taping it shut, it's gross, but it's also, God, you have to respect him for being able to keep up and doing that. It is just like so crazy to me. And the fact these guys are so wrapped up and tangled in it by the end, it's hard to watch. It's a match you really only want to watch maybe one time. It's not a pretty match, but it's the drama, the realism of it, I think, is what really puts it over the edge for me. It's just, that makes it a fantastic match, is the human emotion you feel from watching them and the suffering. I mean, they really suffered for their art here, and I think that match, this should be commended for it as a result. It's drama, it's pure human emotion, but it's one of those things you don't really want to see again. As for the result of this match, Sabu becoming a champion, that's all for nothing, because 8 days later at Hardcore Heaven, Shane Douglas wins the championship once again. So that means all that we saw and all that this sacrifice made in this matchup was for nothing, which that is kind of ECW's big main event stuff in a nutshell. My grade for ECW Born to be Wired is a C+. Now, taking into account this is, like I mentioned, not an official pay-per-view. This is a home video release, and then this was setting up for the pay-per-view the following week. So, you've got, one iconic match, and I think you've got another kind of legendary match in Spike and Bam Bam for what it does for Spike's career in telling that story. But besides that, the rest of this show seems pretty just kind of like lightly put together. Obviously the focus is on the pay-per-view next week. Many of these matches probably weren't even announced until maybe Showtime. So you got, your typical ECW moments and stuff, kind of check the boxes of what an ECW show was like around this time. You get this one really brutal, horrifying match to watch. The rest of it is, you could argue as filler, but I don't think, it's not a bad show. It goes by relatively quickly. It hits all those points of what like an ECW show looks like. Maybe not a lot of like other big moments outside that pay-per-view, outside that main event, I should say. But besides that, I think the show was just, it's a solid, like this is what ECW was back then, for good and for bad. But what did you think of Born to be Wired? What did you think of the iconic and infamous main event match with Funk and Sabu? I want to hear about it in the comment section below. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret, hit that bell icon to get all the notifications. Next time here on the Classic Review, we will be in the month of August, which is of course SummerSlam season, and there will be a lot of SummerSlam content coming down the pike on the channel. And the next time here on the Classic Review, I'm looking at SummerSlam 2000. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.